Now, one of the components of the 802.1x protocol that we were talking about is the Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service, or Radius. Now, Radius provides authentication, authorization, and accounting, commonly called AAA. So, with Radius, what you get is the ability to authenticate users remotely. Now, we use that in order to do authentication from our client into our wireless network. We have a Radius server somewhere in the network that's handling the authentication for us so that when we pass user credentials through, we are able to either authenticate or non authenticate the access attempt. And once that's happened, we can either allow or disallow the access to the network. Commonly, the credentials would be something like a username and password, or maybe even a security certificate that the user provides. With Radius, what we're talking about is a client sending an authentication request. So we send an access request. You can see here in this diagram on the right hand side, you get an access request, and then you either get an access accept, an access reject, or an access challenge. The challenge may be a result of the fact that you're doing multiple factor authentication. So you may actually get a challenge in order to provide additional information. Now, Radius is actually a fairly old protocol, and it's really been superseded by Diameter, which is a bit of a joke. Radius, of course, is half of the diameter, therefore, 2 times radius is diameter. So you can see that Radius has actually been around since 1991. It is still in place in some cases. However, Diameter is the commonly preferred protocol for doing this remote user authentication. Now, coming back to our wireless access point, I can actually enable my Radius client here, and then I can give a Radius authentication server address and port. And I could do the password either by MAC address or shared key. If I use the shared key, I could say, this is my password. And then, of course, I would put in my Radius server. So, for example, I might use this as my authentication server. So you can plug in your Radius information if you happen to have a Radius server. There are a number of Radius servers that are available. There are open source Radius servers. There are also Radius servers that are provided by vendors like Steel Belted Radius, for example, which is currently supported by a networking vendor. So you can use Radius to do user authentication. Requires a Radius server where you use the usernames and passwords or other credentials that you may be using in order to perform the authentication of your users on your network. And many wireless access points, or particularly in the case of an enterprise implementation, would have the ability to implement Radius or turn on Radius within the configuration.